Hey everybody, that guy is
We
guilty.
just heard the verdict in the
That's the
Ahmaud
verdict.
Arbery case, also the polling of the jury.
And
Now we're going to CBS's
I'm gonna go over to
who's outside the courthouse in Brunswick, Georgia. He has been
going
following this case.
to CNN right now. See,
you heard that Greg McMichael was guilty on all counts except for one. He was found not guilty of malice murder. William Rodney
right
Bryant
here.
found guilty of all.
That's better.
I'm going to have to look at the schedule and see how that works with my schedule up in Chatham County and the schedule here in Glynn County. I'll get back to everybody about some dates and see what works with respect to dates. That should give everybody an opportunity to put together whatever evidence may be shown in aggravation from the state or mitigation from the defense. Hopefully we'll get to that in the next couple of weeks. Again, I'll make sure council knows what those dates.
So hey folks, what you're looking at, thanks for joining this live stream, is Greg McMichael, the man who pursued Ahmaud Arbery with his son in Brunswick, Georgia, was convicted of murder. The minimum sentence is life in prison. It's up to the judge to decide whether it comes with or without the possibility of parole. McMichael and his son Travis McMichael grabbed guns and jumped in a pickup truck to pursue the 25-year-old African-American man after seeing him running in their neighborhood, just jogging in Brunswick, which is 3 hours south of where we are. The neighbor, William Rodney Bryant, joined the pursuit in his own pickup and recorded a cell phone video of Travis McMichael fatally shooting Arbery. That led to this trial and the guilty outcomes here. Let's finish watching.
That addresses the open matter then before the court. Anything from the state before we adjourn?
Nothing further from the state, Your Honor.
From Travis McMichael?
No, Your Honor.
From Greg McMichael?
No, Your Honor.
And from Mr. Bryant?
No, Your Honor.
All right, the defendants then are ordered to remain in the custody of the sheriff, and we are adjourned. Thank you.
There you have it, the breaking news, the verdict in the Ahmaud Arbery murder trial. All three defendants found guilty of murdering Ahmaud Arbery in February of 2020. Let me go back to former federal prosecutor Laura Coates and get your reaction first to this verdict, Laura.
This was absolutely the right call, and this is the essence of justice. However, when you're talking about the loss of life of a 25-year-old jogger whose mother's been inside that courtroom, whose father's been inside that courtroom, where the final thing that the jury saw was who Ahmaud Arbery was before he encountered these three men, three strangers, who felt entitled for him to stop simply because they thought that they had some authority to get somebody who was jogging to stop and talk to him. And when he didn't, they pulled out a shotgun and he was shot and killed. And remembering that video, which is so graphic and so horrible to look at, even then he tried to run and the adrenaline was kicking in and he fell again. Remember, this is somebody who tried to run away for 5 minutes until he was cornered, could run no more. And it was the idea of having all three men accountable. Rodney Bryant, of course, said initially that he was only a witness to the crime. But in reality, the jurors were not persuaded by that. Although he did videotape it, he played an active role. The father, Greg McMichael, who was on the back of the truck, played an active role in pursuing. Travis McMichael, who was the person who actually shot him, played an active role. But this case comes down to, one, the absence of a claim, a viable claim of self-defense. The idea, even when Travis McMichael took the stand and said, no, he never threatened me. No, I don't recall him not trying to take the gun. No, he never shouted at me. How could you possibly make a case in that point for self-defense? But more importantly, in the world of Georgia, they have a party to the crime expansive statute that says, look, if you aided and abetted in some way the commission of a crime, you are as guilty as the person who pulled the trigger. Here, Travis McMichael pulled the trigger. That's not in dispute. The other two men aided and abetted, hunting this man down. Why? Because they wanted him to stop. Not because they had some viable color of law or authority. These are three people who are, for all intents and purposes, are laymen. And the prosecution did a phenomenal job ensuring that the jurors saw that each of these men were culpable and that there was no self-defense claim. But I caution people when I say this, and I say this is justice in action. This is really a traumatic experience for this family, a traumatic experience for the nation, one in which justice could never fully be realized when you have the loss of someone's life. But in Georgia, each of these three men, the men that took away the life of somebody's son, somebody's loved one, a human being, they will now serve the rest of their lives in jail. And, Anna, this is not the end of it. They now will have a federal hate crime trial. And I wanted to make one more point here, Anna, if I could. A lot was made about the racial composition of this jury. The idea there's only one black juror. And many people thought in a county, in a jury, something like 27% of black people and 25% from that pool, to have only one black juror, to have the defense counsel refuse to want to allow black pastors in the courtroom. Criticism for the prosecution not raising race enough. 12 human beings recognized that a human being was hunted down and killed.
Yep.
Why? Because he was running. And according to that
because he was black
call that the jurors wanted to hear, the emergency to these men was a black man running. Now this tells you a lot about what we perceive to mean about the jury pool, what we think about the composition of jurors. But 12 human beings, 11 white, 1 black, came to the same conclusion of what they saw. A black man hunted down on the streets of Brunswick, Georgia. Why? Simply because he existed and had the audacity to run and not stop when 3 white strangers told him they'd blow his head off if he didn't.
Laura Coates, stand by with me. That jury was 9 white women, 3 men, 2 of those men white, 1 of them black. You talk about how this family has lived with this hole in their hearts as they have awaited this day and this verdict. And we heard during that court proceeding, after the first guilty verdict was read, woohoo in the courtroom. We learned that came from the father of Ahmaud Arbery, who could not contain his emotion clearly when that verdict was delivered. Let's go live to Sarah Seidner on scene now outside the courthouse. Sarah, what can you tell us?
Look, I'm standing here with Ryan, who has been here throughout this trial from the very beginning now to the very end, and both of us can hear loud chants just behind us. You were hearing people saying, "We got justice." That is the sentiment of the crowd outside. As you mentioned, this jury was made up of 9 white women, 2 white men, and 1 black man, but they all came up with a decision together. And almost every single charge, almost all of the 9 counts against each of these men, they were found guilty. There were a couple of charges that dropped off. For Greg McMichael, for example, one of the charges, the malice murder charge, they said not guilty, but the rest of the murder charges, the other 4, they said guilty. And then for William Bryant. Now, William Bryant is a person, he didn't pull a gun, he was with them, he did use his truck, but those charges that had to do with having a firearm, he did not face those charges, but everything else he faced, and that includes murder and aggravated assault.
And I think the thing that stands out to both of us is the fact that it was also his cell phone that captured this video. There was a lot of people who were upset in this community about the fact it took so long for these charges ever to be filed. And when you think about this happened back in February of 2020, and people were so angry about it. It took several days. It took a GBI investigation to get to the point where the charges are now. And then to have this community really on edge all day, walking around and talking to business leaders here, they were concerned about how this community was going to be bruised by the information that we've seen over and over again. But then you think about it, something that Laura Coates brought up here is the fact that the ending, the prosecution, ended up zeroing in on that video. And if you think about it, just a few hours ago when you popped up live, those jurors wanted to see that video again. And I can tell you, when you watch the video with nothing else but the video, it kind of shakes you. And they wanted to watch it 3 times in a row.
That's right. Okay, guys, stand by. I want to go to Ellie Honig now. And Ellie, as I look at this form that you helped make for me in order to keep track of all of the verdicts, because there were 27 different verdicts reminder, it is interesting. Travis McMichael, he was the one who shot and killed Ahmaud Arbery. He was found guilty on all 9 counts. His father, Greg McMichael, was found guilty on 8 counts, but not malice murder, but the felony murder charges. And then that third defendant, William Bryan, was found guilty on 6 counts. Not guilty on a couple of the murder counts, but guilty on a couple of those. So all 3 men ultimately were found guilty of murder. And I think that's the most important point to underscore here, because the sentence is the same with all these murder charges, life in prison, right?
Exactly, Anna. And I think, first of all, big picture, this is justice. This is justice for Ahmaud Arbery, for his family, for his parents who bore all of this with such grace and dignity. Now, the verdict itself, I think, reminds us that we had a full and fair and complete and careful criminal justice process here. This is how trials are supposed to work. Your jurors are supposed to shut out all the noise, all the politics around this, and make their decision based solely on the facts and the law. And I think the verdict sheet shows that they were very careful. They didn't just say guilty across the board, not guilty across the board. They tailored their verdict to the facts, and now all 3 of these men will spend life in prison.
Okay, Ellie, stand by. Let me bring in Mark O'Mara. You may recall Mark from the Trayvon Martin, the trial of George Zimmerman. He represented George Zimmerman there in that trial, a much different outcome than we are seeing here. Mark, first, your thoughts about this verdict today and this case.
I'm glad we have one. I had mentioned along the way that I was concerned because of the geography of where it was and the fact that there were 11 whites on the panel, but we know from the verdicts that they deliberated well and that they were paying attention during the trial. They used the jury instructions the way they should have, because if you look at it, as Ellie just said, they looked at it and assigned responsibility appropriately to the 3 people involved. Travis, of course, the first charge, the murder charge, the malice murder. Dad, not the shooter, but still heavily involved in leading to the death of it. He got that charge. Roddy Bryan, less involved, but still committed a murder by the felony involvement that he had. So I'm glad that they took their time and that they walked through all of the verdicts the way they did, because now it can be accepted as a well-educated and well-thought-out verdict. And again, not only has justice been served for the Ahmaud Arbery family, but also for the black community generally, and for us who live within the criminal justice system, because the opposite verdict, a hung jury or one where an acquittal came, would have been impossible to defend with the facts of this case.
Thank you, Mark. Stand by. I want to bring in CNN political commentator, who's also a lawyer, Bakari Sellers. And Bakari, the past year we've talked so much about racial justice, right? And this case happened prior to the killing of George Floyd in Minnesota, but it had so many of the same threads that, kind of all fall into that same bucket. And we talk about the role race played in this case and the upcoming hate crime trial that these same defendants will face at a federal level. What do you think today's verdict means more broadly in that discussion?
Well, I hate to push back on my colleagues today who are much more brilliant than I and probably better lawyers than I, but I don't believe today is about justice. I think Ahmaud Arbery being alive is justice. I think today is about something that's actually been even more fleeting for black people in this country in situations like this, which is accountability. Today is a day, just like the Derek Chauvin trial, where you finally have accountability for individuals who hunt people down and murder them and don't give them the benefit of their humanity.
Because they're black.
The unique thing about this is we found out today that, lynching is still illegal in the United States of America. That's what we all saw. But we also know how difficult this journey was for this family to even get to this day of accountability. We know how difficult it was to even bring charges against these individuals. And so I believe that today is the day that this country needed. I don't want to say deserved, but needed, Anna, because the fact is, just imagine if we're sitting here talking about not guilty verdicts. I believe that this country and our democracy is fundamentally fragile and hanging on by a thread. And I don't believe that a not guilty verdict today would have served us well as a country. In fact, going into this holiday weekend, I think it would have torn this country apart. That's how fragile our democracy is. And that's how tired and exhausting it is for people of color, particularly black folk in this country. So yeah, today we had accountability. I've been talking to Ben Crump and Lee Merritt all day long. Today we've had that level of accountability. But I will tell you that this is just one day, and finally we got it, and tomorrow will come, and hopefully more black people won't be killed because of the color of their skin.
Bakari Sellers, thank you. Thanks to all of our guests, our analysts, our reporters.
And folks, I'm putting a freeze on that. Thank you. I'm going to stop this live stream now because we have to get ready for Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving. And my thoughts on this will come more extensively later, but I will say that I hope this brings to an end this habit that occurs where people, white people, feel that they need to lie or tell lies about black people and what they do. That's the bottom line here. You had 3 people who convinced themselves in their head that Arbery was a criminal. They had no evidence of it, and they acted strictly on what they wanted to believe institutionally. And there's a lot of that kind of behavior that goes on in the United States of America, and particularly down here. So I hope this sends a scream to society to stop treating black folks, and particularly black men, that way. That's why I always say, for those of you who regularly watch my program, believe black men when they tell you they didn't do something, because far more often than not, they didn't. So that's it. Subscribe to Zenny62 and bookmark oaklandnewsnow.com, and thanks for watching.